Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the third installment of this series of presentations that's focused on Portfolio Maestro. My name is Frederic Palmliden. I work for the TradeStation Labs department, and I will be the presenter for you this morning. As we get underway with this presentation, you can send questions or comments in the general chat window. I'm going to be monitoring the questions as they come in, but I may save your questions to the end of the presentation, just not to disturb the flow. Also notice that there is a Documents folder on the bottom right corner of your screen. The folder contains the third white paper of the Portfolio Maestro series, which is the focus of this presentation. So you may want to grab it now and save it for later use. The PDF will also be available as an attachment to the archive version of this presentation in a couple of business days on the TradeStation website. Now, before we get going here, please keep in mind that the different trading ideas, the symbols, and other topics discussed in this presentation are for demonstration and educational purposes only, and are not recommendations or endorsements of these symbols or ideas. Also, please read the different disclosure information in the PDF handout available in the Documents folder on the bottom right of the viewer or on the TradeStation website. And actually, let me go ahead here and push it through into the general chat window. Now, this presentation is the third installment of a series of presentations and white papers on Portfolio Maestro. So for more information about Portfolio Maestro's basic functionality, please see the first installment of the series that's entitled Portfolio Backtesting with Portfolio Maestro, an introduction to portfolio backtesting. And here is a link that you can use to access the report. There it is. And when you use that link, you'll see an icon on the right side that says Download Sample Files. So you can use that icon to download the PDF, and you can also use the link to view the video archive. Now, for more information about Portfolio Maestro's other advanced features, please see the second installment of the series, which is focused on Portfolio Maestro's ranking and money management techniques. And you can actually use the same link that I just pushed into the general chat window to access the video in that white paper. So I have a message here from Prasad saying that he does not have any audio. Can the rest of you hear me okay? You could just put a yes. Okay, thank you, David, Brad, thank you. So Prasad, if you're having trouble with audio, I would just recommend refreshing your connection, and you can use that blue X on the top right corner of the viewer. So that's just going to log you out momentarily, and you can just log back in, and hopefully your connection will work better. So now that we talked about the first two installments of the series of presentations on Maestro, in today's installment of the series, we're going to look at constraints and portfolio stops, and we'll look at a few examples to learn more about these advanced features. Now, portfolio constraints, they help you better control portfolio testing based on one or more criteria, while portfolio stops help you manage risk. So that will be the focus of this presentation. Now, we will have a fourth presentation, and that will be sometime in mid-October. And at that point, we'll look at optimization within Portfolio Maestro. Now, just like I did in the beginning of the last presentation, let me give you just a quick recap about the general design of Portfolio Maestro. So think about a pyramid, where the top of the structure is the portfolio, and the base is formed by selected tradable symbols. Now, if you focus on the middle portion of the pyramid, a strategy group in Portfolio Maestro contains at least one strategy and one symbol. But if you recall, strategy groups can actually be very complex with multiple strategies and with many different symbols. So last time we focused on ranking and money management within Portfolio Maestro. And they reside at the strategy group level. Now today, we get to look at constraints and portfolio stops, and they reside at the portfolio level. So the more we add concepts and functionality in this series of presentations, the more important it will be to remember the general structure of Portfolio Maestro, to keep in mind where the different pieces belong. The main reason why the structure is important is because there's a sense of hierarchy in the design. So for example, since constraints reside at the portfolio level, they'll have priority compared to functionality at the strategy group level. So if a constraint is activated, for example, it could actually disregard strategy orders at the strategy group level. And we'll look at an example here in a few moments. So we'll look at constraints together for the first part of this presentation, and we'll look at portfolio stops afterwards. So let me switch here to Portfolio Maestro. And let's dive into the constraint functionality. The goal of constraints is to take into account portfolio requirements that may happen in real trading situations, like not exceeding a specified number of open positions, or not exceeding certain parameters, like a specified margin to equity ratio. So what this means is that constraints may limit trades from being taken. Remember from our pyramid that constraints reside at the portfolio level and can override other settings set at the strategy group level. So if multiple constraints are used in a portfolio, the trade may be omitted if even a single constraint is violated. Constraints may also omit exits under certain circumstances. So when this happens, an open position may actually be carried until the next time a trade is generated and is accepted under the constraints in use. So to access the different constraints, simply click on the portfolio, on the Manage Portfolio icon on the top left of Portfolio Maestro. Then click on the Portfolio Settings once you have a portfolio selected, and click on the Constraints tab. Then you just need to select the desired constraint from the constraint method list, and then just enter the number that you need in the constraint box. Next, click on Set Constraint and repeat the process if additional constraints are needed. Finally, you'll just need to click on OK to close the dialog when finished. Now the details about each selected constraint are displayed in the lower portion of the Constraints tab. You can see it here. You have a description line for each constraint that you select. And there are 12 different constraints that are available in Portfolio Maestro, and they're also described in Table 1 in the white paper. So let me very quickly here just show you that table, so you can see what I'm referring to. So if I switch here to the white paper and I go down to Table 1, you can see all 12 constraints that are available in Portfolio Maestro, and you have a little bit more details. You have a little bit more of a thorough description about each one in the paper versus what you see in Portfolio Maestro. So as you can see, you have many options to choose from. The main idea here is to prevent trades from taking place if they would lead to the chosen metric exceeding a certain figure. So keep in mind here that you're going to have access to this list in the white paper for future use. So don't worry about going through each one right now. And we'll also look at an example together here in a few moments, just to help you better understand constraints. Now let me switch back here to Portfolio Maestro. Now, for some reason, if a constraint needs to be removed from a portfolio, all you need to do is just select the constraint that you need to remove and click on Remove Constraint. You can see that button here, that option on the lower portion of that dialog. So let's look at an example together here to help us better see what the constraint functionality is doing. So I'm going to select the net open position to equity constraint for a portfolio that is made up of a simple strategy group with the supplied Bollinger Bands LE and SE components, just to be able to take long and short entries at the same time on the Dow 10 index. So let me walk you through the different steps to set this example up. So let me get out of this dialog here. Now first, let's create a new strategy group and include the two Bollinger Band strategy components with the Dow 10 index. The newly created strategy group is then going to be added to the portfolio using the Manage Portfolio icon. So let's go ahead and create a new strategy group. I'm going to click on New on the top left, and I'm going to call this PM3 Constraint Demo. I'm going to add my Bollinger Band strategy components. I'm going to include the LE for long entries and the SE for short entries. I'm going to click OK here. I'm going to leave the different settings alone. I'm just going to keep the default settings for now. I'm going to go ahead here and add the Dow 10 to my strategy group using the TradeStation symbol list. I'm just going to go down to the index components, to the Dow Jones indexes, and I'm going to select the Dow 10 index here. All right, now that we have our strategy group created, I'm going to go to the Manage Portfolio. I'm going to create a new portfolio. Let's see, keep the same logic here, PM3 Constraints Demo. Actually, let's call this Portfolio Demo, just like this. So right now, remember, when you create a portfolio, it's going to be empty. It's going to be like an empty shell. So at this point, we need to add the strategy group that we just created. That's going to be the PM3 Constraint Demo. I'm going to select it and click OK. So right now we have two strategy components and we have our symbol list. So let's add our constraint to the portfolio by clicking on Portfolio Settings. I'm going to go to the Constraints tab and I'm going to click on Net Open Position to Equity. And actually in this case, I'm going to change the default setting of 0.5 in the constraint box, and I'm going to put 0.1 instead. I'm going to set the constraint and click OK. All right, so now we just added a constraint to our portfolio. So the portfolio is actually now ready for the backtest. So I'm going to click on Backtest Portfolio on the top right corner. In this case, I'm just going to go back 1 year. I'm going to use the standard type of backtest, and I'll go ahead and perform the backtest. Actually, I'm going to save the report, because one thing that we can also do is, in order to better see the impact of portfolio constraints, is to run the same backtest on the same portfolio, except for the inclusion of a constraint. That way, we can go back and forth between the two reports and see the impact of the constraint functionality just a little bit easier. So here, let me make a copy of the portfolio that we just tested, and let me only change the constraint. So I'm going to go back to my portfolio list. You can see all my portfolios listed here on the bottom portion of the screen. I'm going to select the portfolio that we just tested, and I'm going to click on Save As on the top left corner. And the only thing I'm going to do here is just change the name so that we know that this one is not going to have any constraints. So I'm going to put no C on it. Click OK. All right. So the only thing I need to do here is go back to the portfolio settings and remove the net open position to equity. So it's already selected here. I'm going to click on the Remove Constraint. I'm going to click on OK. So this is an exact replica of the portfolio that we just tested, except for the inclusion of the constraint. So now let me go ahead and backtest this portfolio using the same time period. I'm just going to go back 1 year, use a standard backtest type, and let me go ahead and perform that backtest. All right, so now let's go and take a look at the some of the TradeStation charts that include Bollinger Band strategy components, so that we can compare the different signals for the different stocks in our portfolios to what's going on in a TradeStation chart. So, and we'll start with the portfolio that did not include a constraint. So that will be the last one that we did. And so you can see it here being selected on the bottom portion of your screen. So what I'll do here is actually try to split the screen. I'm going to try to sort my symbols. That's something you can do using the symbol column in the trades list portion of the report. I'm going to click on that button. That way my symbols are sorted. And let's see, let me just go to GE right here. So the first trade is on September 4th, 2012. So now if we go to TradeStation and we look at the same symbols using the same strategy. So let's take a look at GE, for example. Let me go back to September 4th of 2012. Right here, you should be able to see that little table next to where I'm pointing. So you can see it's a buy signal on the chart to buy 100 shares of GE on September 4th, 2012 at, let's see, $20.63. And, you know, that's exactly what you see here in Portfolio Maestro for the very first signal. You can see that listed the very first line in Portfolio Maestro. And if we go down the next line, we can see an exit on September 18th. And that's the one you have right here. We are now short 100 shares of GE at $21.99. And we could keep going here. But I think you get the gist, that the trades are matching. And you can do that for all the different symbols. So if you backtest a portfolio without any constraints, and then you look at the same signals in TradeStation, they're going to match. But now let's switch to the portfolio that did include the constraint, and this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and sort my trades by symbol, and let's go back to GE right here. And you should be able to tell right away that we have, nowhere near the amount of trades that we just did. Looking at the other portfolio, we actually have only 3 orders here out of a collection that we had for the other portfolios. So now the trades do not match at all when you compare what you have here in Portfolio Maestro versus what you would see in a TradeStation chart. So, but if you recall, we chose to include the net open position to equity constraint. So when suggested trades from the strategy group would lead to the ratio exceeding our specified amount of 0.1, then the trades are simply omitted. They're just not taken. And we can see that for GE, a number of trades were omitted in the last year, and we actually only had 3 trades left from the list. So now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the specific numbers behind the constraints, but you can actually see more details in the white paper if you are interested. And just to let you know that you can retrieve most of those numbers that you need to monitor constraints from the performance report, especially if you take a look at the trades list that we, using the tab that we just looked at, but also looking at the equity table. That's going to give you a lot of very useful information to keep track of those different constraints. So, and also by keeping track of those figures, the user can then monitor when the conditions for the different constraints are triggered and when strategy orders are being filtered. So really the main thing here to remember about constraints is that they act as filters. They filter trades, which may or may not have a positive impact on performance. So to see the difference a constraint makes, just simply backtest your portfolio with a constraint and then without, and then compare the 2 reports. So some of the graphs that may come very handy when comparing performance include the maximum adverse excursion graph, where you can see the drawdowns for individual trades. So let me go ahead and show you that example. So if we go here to the Graphs tab, and if we go choose here instead of equity, if we go to Trades, and I'm going to select the max adverse excursion %. So if we go back and forth now between the 2 reports, so this one is the one with the constraint, and this is without. So notice a couple of things here. When we do not use a constraint, the drawdown, looking at the horizontal axis, notice that here the maximum is going to be around 26% drawdown, and if we go to the portfolio that had the constraint, it's actually going to be a little bit higher, closer to 30. But notice that using the constraint, we closed this position here, which you see on the top left, around 20% or so. But if we switch to the portfolio without the constraint, it's going to be much lower. So, and this is just one particular example. It may be very different when you backtest your own portfolios. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is that it's really going to be a give and take. You're going to give up, something more than likely, and you're going to maybe gain something instead using constraints. And it's just going to depend on your own settings, your own criterias, and what you're working on. Just please remember that constraints may not always have a positive impact on performance, and past performance is definitely not a guarantee of future performance. So let's switch gears here a little bit, and let's talk about portfolio stops. Now that we know what constraints do, it will be very easy to pick up the portfolio stop functionality. Remember the pyramid structure? Portfolio stops reside at the portfolio level, just like constraints. So they too can act, and they can affect positions. So very much like circuit breakers, if you will, when certain parameters go beyond certain limits. And there are going to be 3 portfolio stops in Portfolio Maestro that you can use, and you can see a description of each one in Table 2 in the paper. So let me just go back to the paper here, so you can see that list real quickly. It's going to be, all right, bear with me a second. Right here, it's going to be on page 7 of the white paper. If you look at Table 2, you'll have a complete list of the portfolio stops that are currently available in Portfolio Maestro. Now, the overall goal here behind portfolio stops is to address portfolio that may come up in real trading situations, so just like constraints. So let's say, for example, that you need to close all positions in your portfolio if your equity goes down by a set percentage. Well, if you need to do that, you can use a portfolio stop loss, for example, and that would just that would meet that requirement. So when using any of these options, when the stop criteria is met, all positions are closed and no trade is taken until the next period, which could either be a day, a month. It just depends on the period that you select in the different options for your stops. So let's look at an example to help us pull these concepts together. And let me go back here to Portfolio Maestro. So I'm going to use the portfolio percent trailing stop in a new strategy group, which is made up of the NASDAQ 100 index components with the moving average cross LE and SE components for long and short entries. So just like the previous example, here we can make a copy of the same portfolio except for the inclusion of a portfolio stop, just to see the impact of the functionality. So first, create a new strategy group. So let's go back to the Manage Strategy Groups. So let's create a new strategy. We call this one Portfolio Stops. Demo. All right. I'm going to add my moving average cross LE and SE components. LE for long entry and SE for short entry. I'm going to click OK here. And in this case, I'm actually going to change some of these default settings by going to the Strategy Settings tab. And for the LE component, I'm going to change this period here from 9 to 5. Click OK. And for my SE component, I'm going to change, actually, let's see, I think I changed the SE to 5, and I want this one actually to be let's see, 21. So let me change this one to 21. Click OK here and go back to my 9. I'm going to click change this one to 5. So 5 for LE and 21 for the SE component. Now my newly created strategy group is then going to be added to a new portfolio. So I'm going to go to the manage portfolio and click on new. And so it's going to be my PM3 stops portfolio demo. And click OK here. So as usual, this is just going to be an empty shell until I add my strategy group. So let's add my PM3 stops demo here and click OK. And yeah, one thing that I forgot to do here is to add our symbol list. So let me do that right now. I'm going to go to the symbol list tab from my strategy group. I'm going to TradeStation symbol list. I'm going to click on index components, go down to the NASDAQ indexes, and choose the NASDAQ 100 index. All right, so now if we go back to the manage portfolio, we have that symbol list in the portfolio. So in this case, I'm going to go to my portfolio settings. I'm going to click on the portfolio stops tab, and I'm going to choose the portfolio percent trailing stop and keep the default settings. Let's pick this one. I'm going to set the stop and click OK. You can see the different details about the portfolio percent trailing stop by clicking on the plus sign next to the name. So now my portfolio is ready to backtest. So I could click here on backtest. And in this case, I'm going to go back, let's see, we'll do 18 months. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to run this since it's going to do it for 100 stocks. I don't want to lock this up right now. But I did perform the backtests prior to this presentation. So let me just go to that report right now. If we go to my performance report here, I'm going to go down the list. So here's what it looks like using the two strategy components that I just mentioned on this NASDAQ 100 using the portfolio percent trailing stop with the default settings. So, and I did the same backtest on the same portfolio, except for the inclusion of the stop, the portfolio stop, so that we can go back and forth between the two reports, just like we did earlier with the constraints. And that's going to be this backtest right here. So this is the equity curve using the portfolio stop, and this is the one without. So actually, let me switch here to the symbol, the strategy group cumulative P&L by date, which is going to be a little bit easier to see. And if we go back and forth between the two reports, we can see that the inclusion of the portfolio stopped really helped the P&L curve to be more linear. So this is the one without the portfolio stop, and this one is with the inclusion of the portfolio stop. Also, the exit efficiency graph also shows a noticeable improvement. So let me go here and show you that graph. If we go to trades and click on the exit efficiency. So this is going to be with the inclusion of the portfolio stop, and this one is without. So notice the horizontal red line that you have going across your chart, and it's, you know, basically about 10% lower without the inclusion of the portfolio stop. So, you can see a positive impact in this particular case, but keep in mind that stops may not automatically have a positive impact on performance. For example, the inclusion of a portfolio stop loss may actually hinder performance by not allowing strategies time to turn around after experiencing equity drawdowns. So the decision to include or exclude portfolio stops may just depend on the characteristics of your individual portfolio. So you may just want to spend some time experimenting with the technology in a simulated environment just to see the impact of portfolio stops on your portfolios. And that's really the beauty of Portfolio Maestro, is that you can do all of this backtesting in a simulated environment without risking capital. All right, well, this brings us to our question and answer time. So while you type in questions, keep in mind that if you missed something or you did not quite understand something that I covered, you're going to have access to this video archive. You can also send me questions at tslabs@tradestation.com, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. This video archive is going to be available in probably in a couple of business days, and you're also going to have access to the white paper, which covers all the content that we discussed today. In fact, let me go ahead here and push the paper into the general chat window in case if you missed it or if you joined us a little bit late. There it is. So let me see here. I have a question from David. Can we customize or write our own constraints, or are we limited to the 12 in the menu? So yeah, for now you're going to be limited to the 12 that we have currently available for you. There are a number of improvements in the works for Portfolio Maestros, with a major update that we're all waiting for. And but for now, the constraints that you see, the 12 that you have in the list, are going to be what's available. So let me go up in the general chat. Let's see if we have any more questions. I actually don't see any more questions. So hopefully you guys got a good idea of what portfolio stops are all about in Portfolio Maestros, as well as constraints. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at tslabs@tradestation.com, and I'm going to type that address into the general chat window so that you have it. There it is. So it's just me and a handful of others that have access to that email. So I'll be able to see your questions very quickly as they come in. Where can I find parts 1 and 2 of the white paper? Very good question from David. So let me go ahead here and push a link into the general chat window that you can use to access those 2 papers. So for now, the 2 papers are attached to the video archives of part 1 and part 2. So let me actually, what I can do is go ahead here into the browser and show you where you can find those a little bit easier. So if you go to the TradeStation website, if you go into the education and click on events, then click on demand webcasts, and go to strategy trading. You'll have a list of archive videos and part 1 and 2 of the Portfolio Maestro series will be in this list. So you can see the one here that I'm showing is part 2, which is focused on Portfolio Maestro's ranking and money management techniques. So you'll have access to the video here and also the white paper by clicking on download sample files. All right, let's see if we have any more questions. I actually don't see any questions come in, so I think we'll stop the Q&A time. And let me switch back to the slideshow here. So I just want to point out the next Portfolio Maestro event, which will take place in mid-October. And that particular installment of the series will be focused on portfolio optimization within Portfolio Maestro. The link that you would usually use in the live events part of the TradeStation website is not going to have this event available yet, but it will be available for you in the next few days if you want to register for that event. Now, on this slide, you can see information to contact TradeStation, and you can also email me, as I mentioned earlier, at tslabs@tradestation.com with any questions that you may have on the material that was presented today. So lastly, I just want to mention here that you have access to an online survey by clicking on this link that you see on the top portion of the slide. It's your chance to submit feedback and provide any suggestions that you may have. So thank you very much for attending. The room will stay open for another couple of minutes or so. So have a nice rest of the day, and see you soon at another TradeStation event. Thanks again.